Just a quick review. Pardon me? Yeah, are there more sheets going around? Is there a stack of them that got stuck somewhere? All right. How many people still need one? We got a few people, not too many. One more over there. Maybe a couple more. I don't know. Close. Just a quick review from last week. We're doing this series on the liturgy with our friend Dr. Just. So what does liturgia mean from last week? Liturgy means public service, or maybe tax. So this is something that is done on behalf of the whole. So and this is one of the words that the early church used to describe what happened when they came together, was that they did the liturgy. That is the service. Pastor Meyer pointed out to me that this is also the word in the Old Testament, when the Old Testament was translated into Greek, that this was the word that was used that described what the priest did in the temple. That the priest had his liturgia, his service that he did on behalf of the whole. So I expect to talk about that more along the way. And then your next we have 3 57-cent words here, right in a row. So we got $1.56 worth of words right off the bat. What does synaxis mean? Anyone remember? You can almost make it out from the two halves here. Sin, like a synonym. A synonym is the same word. So sin means same or together, and we kind of know what an axis is, right? So synaxis means a coming together, a gathering together for a common purpose. This is another word that was used often. And then our favorite German word is the word Gottesdienst, which means, anybody? Divine service or God's service. So this is probably, I wouldn't call it uniquely Lutheran, but Lutherans are definitely the ones that own this word, that have kind of made the most use of it, Gottesdienst. And so our liturgy, our communion services, and our hymnals now are called divine service. We have divine service 1, divine service 2. That's really just a translation of Gottesdienst. This next video, which is about, I think it's 15, 16 minutes long, something like that. This next video is on kind of an overview of the structure of the liturgy. And so I want you can see in your kind of study sheets a lot of the stuff he's going to talk about. There are a couple things that I want to sort of point out to you to keep an eye out. One is the concept of a rite, R-I-T-E, of a rite, which are the words. What are the words that go along? Another is the concept of space, which of course really compels me to say space, the final frontier, the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. And so both the words, the rite, the space, where things take place, kind of how these things relate to each other, and then finally the concept of time. And there we get this 8th day notion that he's going to talk about a little bit more. And so we're going to get kind of a lot of stuff packed in here in about 15 minutes or so along the way. I think that we are ready. I'm going to get this started, and then I'm going to go turn up the volume, because I think it will probably be good. So that obviously is kind of a very high-level picture of a lot of things that are going on here. And I just want to highlight a few of these things to try and get them in context. for us, and then I'll take whatever kind of questions or other things that sort of boggled your mind through all of that. I will have a quiz about all the dates that were flashed up there again, so I will took good notes. He listed three basic structures, is what he called them. The first was rite. What was the second one? Space. And what was the third one? Time. All right. And all three of these things, rite, generally speaking, at least as he's using it here, means the words. What was actually said, what was prayed, how, those things. And then the space means where. Although I would also add to that the sense of movement that happens in there. And I know that we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later on, but I think it's helpful for us to start thinking about these things. And then the notion of time, that things that we go through these cycles, and everything sort of resets every week, and he kind of really started to get us going in that 8th day sense. Now, as Dr. Just kind of put this forward, what he argued was that these three things, the rite, the space, and the time, are all kind of interconnected. They're all sort of constellations, and if one of them shifts, if one of them changes, then the other ones are going to kind of organically adapt. So let me give you a very concrete example. He mentioned this early Christian house church. We've actually looked at it before, at least once, maybe twice, called Dura Europos, which is this house church that was discovered from the 2nd century. It's on the Euphrates River. And this house church was very small, like, this size, that kind of square, and that might be a place for 30 to 50 people to worship. Okay, so it would be cozy, I think would be the word, and there are no chairs, there are no benches. There's a table, but there's a baptismal really basin or almost sink cut into the ground in the corner. But everybody is sort of standing and milling around. If there's small children or the infirm might be against the wall, there might be a stool for one of them, maybe not. But with that kind of space, there isn't a lot of movement, is there? Right? There's no place to go. And so the rite, the words, have to be simple. Because the space is very simple. There just isn't a lot of coming and going. It's going to have a much more, it's going to have an almost intimate feel to it. Okay? Everybody sort of tracking with me there? When you moved into, and what did he call that first period? Anybody remember? He called it the domestic period, because this was the time they were mostly worshiping in houses, house churches. Okay? So the next period was called the imperial period. That sounds very serious. This is the period starting around 330 AD, when Christianity is first legalized, and then by 150 years or so later, really becomes the predominant religion in the Roman Empire. And it's in this period that Christianity grows like crazy, because it's legal, and eventually it becomes politically advantageous to be a Christian. It's amazing how many people will convert when there's good political reasons to do so. And so as a result of this, the spaces become larger. Because this little space here, you can maybe fit 50 or 60, but you can't fit 500. Physically won't be there. And so the spaces have to get larger. This is really in the period where you start to get churches, from our perspective at least, that look like churches. That look like it's a separate building that's going to be longer, it's going to be larger. There still aren't pews. Pews don't come in until about the 17th century. So pews are very, very light. But these are much bigger spaces. And so if you've got a priest or a pastor on one end of the building that's got to get to the front, and he's got 500 people between him and the front, and there are no pews, which means there's no what? There's no aisle. Either he's going to have to get, he's not going to have fourth grade acolytes, right? He's either going to have to get a couple acolytes that are going to look more like linebackers, or he's going to have to get something that is going to get people so that they can actually see that he's coming. Maybe put a cross on a stick, for example, right? And hold it up and start singing so that people can see that something's happening. So you naturally are going to have movement that is going to take place. Does that make sense? Is everybody kind of tracking? So these things start to develop organically. There wasn't a voters' assembly that decided to have an introit. Because that's what the word introit means, is to go in. So if we were to really do an introit as it's intended, the introit would start from the back, and you'd walk in while you were introiting. That's what it means. But there wasn't a voters' meeting that they decided that they were going to add this to the liturgy. This is just, I got to get in, and it just made sense that we'd be singing. And since everybody knew the Psalms, it made sense to sing the Psalms. This is also when hymns and canticles and other things sort of start to come in, because this is happening during the movement of the space. So again, the space determines the rite, that is the words that are happening. Another change is this notion of time, and he alluded to it, but we'll have a whole session on it later on. That you have in the church kind of multiple layers of time, and we all get this in our lives, right? You have night and day, weekend, weekday, months, years, decades. I mean, we all understand this notion of layers of time, and it starts small. It starts weekly, where you have a Sunday, but eventually, as we'll see, certain days will start to come out that will get marked. So one of the earlier days is both Jesus' death, which also ties his annunciation and his birth. Those three are actually kind of tied together. Because in the ancient world, for great men, the understanding was that the day you died was the day you were conceived. And so once it was established and understood that the day that Jesus died, that was on March 25th, well, guess what? That's when the Annunciation is established, March 25th, and that's when, what else? Christmas happens 9 months later. So now all of a sudden you've got these other calendars that aren't just going on a weekly cycle, but are going on an annual cycle. And so it just sort of organically develops. And because you've got a larger space and you've got more time, you've got more people that are able to do these things. So this concept of the rite, of the space, and of the time are all interconnected along the way. Now, let's just pause pause on thinking about the Just video for a moment. And let's talk for a minute about our own sense of right, of the words that we use. And that is that we kind of go through cycles of rites that are also based on times. Divine Service 1, Divine Service 2, Divine Service 3, Divine Service 4. So we have these different orders which are really similar to each other but are not identical. Mostly the music is different. Sometimes the words are a little different. And usually when those rites change, at least the way that we do it here, we change those by season, more or less. So we'll have one rite that we'll use for Advent. We'll have a rite that we'll use for Lent. We'll have a rite that we'll use for the season of Easter. And that kind of thing. So we'll try to think in terms of those spaces so that the words line up with the time. Does that make sense? Does everybody kind of understand what I'm talking about? I think how do we mark in our space the passage of time and kind of the seasons? Pyramids, which means color, right? So we'll have white up for Christmas and Easter. We'll have red up for Pentecost or for Reformation Sunday. Blue during Advent. Of course, half of the year we're not quite sure what to do, so we'll put up green. Right? So we do have some notion of the space changes with the time. Are there any other markers? Any other relationships that we often see between the space and the time in worship? Barbara?
Could it be the hymns that we sing in those spaces?
Sure, absolutely. I'm not typically going to sing Away in the Manger on Good Friday, right? So our music reflects the time as well. And sometimes that's more specific than other times, right? And sometimes those things can kind of have multiple layers. So it may be that on a Sunday when we have a baptism, but it's also Good Shepherd Sunday, we might have a Good Shepherd hymn, but then we'll also have a baptism hymn. So there are kind of multiple rites and times going on all together. What else? How else does the words and the time and the space, or the words and the time kind of relate to each other now? Dennis?
Don't perform certain parts of the liturgy at different times.
Sure. The most obvious with that is probably the Gloria, and the Alleluia is not typically sung during Lent. That's probably the most obvious. But there are other little things that sort of come and go seasonally as well. So that's another way that the rite is kind of shaped by the time. And that might also shape the space a little bit too. We probably wouldn't have an Alleluia banner up during Lent, right?
Crosses.
Yeah, we veil the crosses. That's another one of our Lent. It is interesting to me that our physical space, the changes that take place in our physical space are largely limited to Lent, Easter, and Advent, Christmas. Those are kind of the two big periods. And, those are the two big days, or seasons, really. But they're not the only ones. And so I think one of the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves is, are there other ways that we can mark the times in our space and in our rites? You can just kind of put that away in your head along the way. There was one other that we did last year during Lent, and that was that we didn't have any flowers in the sanctuary during Lent. Anybody notice that? Anybody get mad about that?
Yeah.
They didn't have flowers for their birthday? Barbara was mad at me for that. Yeah. Well, and the reason for that was again this notion of how does our space reflect what the time is, what the season is. One other thing I want to point out for this before I go on is that these aren't laws. There isn't a Bible passage that you're going to look to that's going to say, "Thou shalt not have lilies during Lent," or something like that, right? This isn't a law. And I think this is a really important thing. I know Dr. Just talks about this more later. But that all of these things, the rite, the space, and the time, all serve the gospel. They all serve the proclamation of the gospel and holding up Jesus Christ as the Savior of the world. If they are doing that, fine and good. If we're doing it because, we think that that's going to make us better than somebody else, or whatever, then that's not fine and good. Then it's not actually serving the purpose of the church. Now it's serving some other selfish need. And so in Lutheran kind of categories, the way that I would put that is that the things that we do always have to flow from what we believe. If it doesn't flow from what we believe, and if it doesn't lead to what we believe, then why are we doing it? It's always going to be the fundamental question. And so in order for us to answer that question, we always have to be asking, what do we believe, and what do we do? And how are these two things connected to each other? Yeah, Julia.
Well, that brought up a thought. So the congregation is part of the space too. So
Right.
even though there are no laws pertaining to it, we tend to watch how we dress and how we
Right.
appear in church.
Yep.
Not just because we're afraid of
Right.
church or whatever.
That's not a mark of holiness.
Right. I'm not going to wear like a bright red dress on Good Friday, or I'm not going to dress in all black because it's even on Easter. Like,
Right.
That's just sort of, and that's not something we have to do. It's sort of something
It is a reflection of what you believe about the words, about the space, and about the time. And that is something that I think is good for us to highlight and to teach. I do think that has some interesting challenges in our culture as well, because in our culture I think we are very sensitive to the notion of, I don't want to tell other people what to do. And so that is challenging. How do we do these things in a way that is honorable and respectful and is not judgmental? There isn't a kind of, oh, well, here's the quick answer to that. But that's a good challenge. It's a challenge.
I think just saying that.
Yep. And that's kind of the start, is to set an example, and I would say to understand the why as well. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just again to sort of get a pass at some of these big time periods. The domestic period that was up until about 3:30. Anybody get anything on that period? That was the house church.
3:12.
Yeah, 3:12. I mean, there are different ways you can count it.
But as you said, 3:12 is when
That was the Edict of Milan. Yeah, this is this edict that Constantine passed that allowed Christianity to exist kind of as a legitimate religion in the Roman Empire, which was after he won a battle that he claimed was because he had a cross on the soldier's shields. The imperial period. Anybody get anything on that period? This was from about 330 to 600-ish. Dennis?
larger churches.
Yeah, these are larger. This is a period of growth. This is this kind of explosive growth of the Christian church takes place during this period. Medieval period, so we're talking 600 until 1450-ish, about the time of the Reformation, or near that period. he used a couple different words. I don't remember if he used the word disintegration.
Yes.
He used disintegration. I think what I would use is complexity. That this is the period when the liturgy becomes more and more complex, and I would add becomes, in many ways, becomes separated from the lives of the people, and becomes more sort of something that the priest does and the people are kind of watching and not participating in. We'll talk about that more. Marion and then Dennis.
Didn't the worship of Mary become?
Yeah, and this is when you get the rise of the cult of the saints, worship of Mary. This is when you get the rosaries, all kinds of interesting things take place. And as I said, we'll get at that when we talk about the period in a little more detail. Dennis, did you have something?
Just a strong sense of piety that comes into the common people should not be touching.
Yeah, and there is, and like so many things, that piety has a good, I think starts in many respects for good reasons, but sort of ends up going sideways and in ways that aren't healthy for the church. Well,
Was there any indication, like way back in the domestic period, that space could use other days Sunday?
sure, there were prayer offices and there were services going on every day,
So that's
almost constantly.
Yeah.
But they wasn't used for anything other than worship. That's not sure.
okay, because it's like the
Yeah.
way it was set up. It's like just off the street you go in,
Right. Yeah.
next to the shops and everything.
Yep. Kind of in the middle of the town square, etc. Levi.
If the medieval period is about complexity, kind of when our age, the good age, describes a period of disintegration in some ways.
I feel like there might be some disintegration in our period. I feel like that was a leading question. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's a part of what's interesting in our period, in the times in which we live, is that on the one hand, it's a period of great disintegration and subjectivity, and kind of anybody does what's right in their own eyes, but it's also a period of great restoration. So at the same time, I'm just sort of curious. The Reformation, I would call Reformation was a time of probably recovery. This is certainly a term. Did he use another term there? Restoration. Did he use restoration? Okay, same concept. And then pietism and rationalism was another period of disintegration. We'll talk about that more. But this is kind of the time of all of this talk about God is sort of old-fashioned. This is Enlightenment, rationalism, and then pietism was really kind of not an offshoot of that, but grew out of this notion that my encounter with God must be personal, and so having a corporate church, having worship together that's with this group becomes impersonal. And so it's got to be more personal. So this is kind of an anti-institutional movement. And then he has a very optimistic view of Lutherans in America, which I appreciate. Not always that optimistic, so I appreciate anyone that's optimistic like that. It's good. But again, this is kind of very, very high level, big pictures of some of the stuff we're going to be looking at here along the way. And I'm going to skip these questions for right now because I do want to get at some of these at this church that we're going to look at. But we can, if you have questions that you want to bring up specifically about this, bring them next Sunday and we'll do them right off the bat. Okay? Seth, would you hit the lights for me again? This is Calvary Evangelical Lutheran Church in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Mechanicsburg is outside Harrisburg, along the way here. Did you say you used to work there?
Yeah, all the mechanics.
Yeah. So there you go. Here's Pittsburgh for Stacy. This is, and down here is Maryland, Baltimore, DC, etc. So that's kind of where we're talking about. This is actually a church that's 100 and some years old, that was one of the original churches of the English district of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But this building was built in 1982. Their building was destroyed in I think in a fire or something like that in 1973, and then they worshipped in another building for 10 or 12 years while they were building their new space. So there's kind of and there are a couple reasons why I wanted to show you this. Our space has a number of 8-sided things in it. We've got an 8-sided font. The communion rail is 8-sided. Our altar itself is 8-sided. Well, this entire space is designed octagonally. It's not a completely in the round space, but if if you're to count it off, understanding that part of the octagon isn't finished on the other side, but the entire space is in an octagon. You see how there's this curve in the pews there? I thought that was kind of interesting along the way.
Also, our whole sanctuary is 8-sided.
Yes, that's true. That's true. This is the view from the pulpit, which I thought was rather interesting, because the pulpit is right behind the altar. You will occasionally run into that or see that in some older churches, Wendish or Serbian churches, where they have a wraparound balcony. The pulpit will be above the altar, so it would be like up here. I remember seeing that in Germany, many places along the way. But there are a few pieces to this that I think are worth noting. Similar to our space on how they do this. This doesn't go all the way around, but it's a much larger. They're able to commune a much larger number of people than would be common in your in your older straight communion rail churches. This is Palm Sunday. So you have, these weak Pennsylvania-looking palm branches. Sorry, that's so bad. You can see the veiling of the cross, both here and the processional cross along the way. Also, this is not violet or purple. It's scarlet. Yeah, so it's a deep red, because Palm Sunday is also known as Passion Sunday. And the actual color for that day is scarlet. Most churches don't have that, don't have scarlet paraments. But that's, again, I'm always asking these questions, but how do we show the time in our space along the way? And that was one of the things I found quite interesting in this space. This is Good Friday. So they did the bearing of the altar, the stripping of the altar, so there are no paraments or anything. You can see right here, this is called a hearse, which is this stand for a tenebrae service, for the service of darkness. And those are candles up there along the way. This is also a pretty good picture to see. They've got a couple nice art pieces back here of baptism and the Lord's Supper. And then over on the left side, you remember there was a processional cross. And then on the right side, right there, is their eternal candle. Ours is kind of suspended from the ceiling there. Here it is on Easter. You can get you can see in this one. Obviously, they have an Easter banner here. This is their baptismal font. It's here on the left. The organ is right here. This is not a baptismal font. It's actually where they hold their communion trays, which actually seemed kind of weird to me, frankly. But it's okay. They also have these. We have these torches as well. What I like about these is that they're a lot taller, and they have these followers on them. That kind of makes it so people don't fiddle with them, and they're much less likely to be damaged The hard thing about that, of course, is I bet they're a real pain to light along the way. So there's always pluses and minuses there, right? They put their lilies right in front of the altar, which looks nice. That must mean that during that season they do everything from the other side of the altar, because I am here to tell you that those will get kicked in about 3 seconds. Otherwise. Yeah, we already looked at the torches on the pews. This is how they do those at Christmas. They do the same thing with their poinsettias. Put them all in front and around the altar there.
That is a nativity scene.
Yes, yep, and this is a little nativity scene. Kind of looks like it's in a fish tank, although I doubt if it's in a fish tank. That seems unlikely to me. I don't, let me see if we can tell. Yeah, they moved their, here you can see it a little better. There's this nativity scene. There's the font. There's one of their trees. I think they have 3 trees. There you can see the organ. It's an electronic organ. Probably certainly the most prominent piece in the space is the cross, which I really love. I love the crucifix there. That's fantastic. It's very defining. And this has this nice liturgical line between the cross and the preaching and the sacrament of the altar, kind of all right down the middle. That is really nice. There's that nativity set. You can see here's this is the entrance in their narthex, which is quite nice. If I were to have any sort of critiques of that space, I would say that it does look pretty dark. It's all dark wood. It's all, they've got a kind of darkish carpet. The whole place is carpeted. So it is pretty dark. But there are some other elements that are really quite nice to it that I think would be worth considering. So that's a Calvary Lutheran Church in Mechanicsburg, built in 1982. A long way. Next week, we look at the Jewish origins of Christian worship. We'll talk more about Seder's, among other things. Let's close with the benediction. Thank you. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen. Have a great day, everybody.